everybody, to this very special edition of the Silver Screen Action Figure Podcast. This is your host, Andre Joseph, and today we have an interesting little roundtable discussion on all things related to Marvel, and it's going to be the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's going to be past Marvel movies prior to Disney buying Marvel in early 2010, and we're going to talk about, we'll get into the action figures, of course, but, a lot of us, because we're adults, we haven't really had too many opportunities to play with the current set of Marvel action figures, but I certainly want to talk about the early Toy Biz and even the Mattel Secret Wars action figures from the 80s and 90s, because those were very instrumental in our childhoods and gave us that opportunity in our minds to create what we thought a Marvel movie would have looked like. So this is a very special edition because for the longest time in previous episodes, I've mentioned my cousins and how we've always grown up, playing with these action figures, collecting, and I actually have them here today. And it's a really exciting opportunity to introduce you guys to my cousins, Richard Dryden and Chris. So say hello, guys.
What's up, man? How you doing? What's up, Andre? Thanks for having us. This is Richard. Yeah, this is Chris, and I'm very happy to be on this podcast with you. Yeah, it's a great moment to finally be on the show. Like you said, we've been mentioned numerous times on various episodes, and we've talked about, well, we've talked behind the scenes, but I've listened to your shows and heard so many conversations and walked down memory lane with you vicariously, reminiscing about some of these great childhood memories of some of our favorite toys and movies and TV shows, and now we finally get to give our firsthand recollection of these toys.
Yeah, man. So I feel like I just got to get this off my chest right away because it was about, I think, 2 weeks ago around this time when Avengers Endgame was released. Obviously, we've waited an entire year for this picture because Infinity War, everybody thought that was going to be the big event because everybody grew up reading the Infinity Gauntlet comic book with every single Marvel character coming together. But I always said, even before that movie was released, I said, they're savoring the real moment, which is going to be the movie after Infinity War. And, when the film ended the way it did with the Thanos snap and half the heroes getting turned to dust, and that bizarre cliffhanger that left everybody wondering for 1 year what was going to go down next and how are they going to get these guys back. I said, whatever they're going to do, it's going to be huge, especially if it's going to be the last movie in this phase. And I'm happy to say that that movie, and I've seen it twice now, it did not disappoint. And, I'm going to get into spoilers, guys, because it's already 2 weeks in. So if you haven't seen it, you better turn this off right now. So, all I got to say is that, there were those moments, especially towards, like, you had your peaks and valleys with this movie, right? So you're going through the Avengers, what's left of them, all kind of like, first they want to get revenge on Thanos, then it's kind of a letdown because he already destroyed the Infinity Gems. Then we suddenly get this 5 year jump, and everybody's kind of distraught and feeling like, they're just trying to move on, but it's difficult. And then, Ant-Man comes out of the quantum realm, and now we have this opportunity to do time traveling, to go back to the previous films so they can get the gems and create their own Infinity Gauntlet to get everybody back, not knowing that Thanos from the Guardians of the Galaxy era finds out about all this and comes back into the present time, brings his whole army, and all I gotta say is that moment, guys, when you have his entire army up against Captain America on his own. And I just said in the back of my mind in the theater, I'm like, could this be it? Could this really be the Infinity Gauntlet? And all of a sudden, when you heard Falcon's voice on the radio and you saw the portals come out, I cried. I cried because all of a sudden, the dream that we all had when we were playing with those figures back in the day, when we would have like the gang ups and all the team
Yeah.
ups with all the heroes and villains, and to finally see that on the big screen, it was like, holy shit, they finally did it. And now it's kind of gone down as maybe one of my favorite films of all time.
Yeah, mine too. I'm gonna honestly say it's in my top three now because the execution of this movie was like was well done. A lot of people say it had a slow start, but for the fans and the diehard fans, we all know that everything they did was well warranted. And I honestly, I've seen this movie twice as well in the theater, and I feel like this is one of the best Russo brothers movie that they ever done.
Hell yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that scene that you said too, when Captain America, first of all, when he picked up the hammer,
Oh my god.
that was the biggest moment for me. I was like, I yelled, I screamed, I was like, oh, yo! I got up, everybody's like, yo, it was so crazy. I was stomping my seat. Yeah, that was like, yo, honestly, when that happened, I was like, wow, like, and then right after, like, that was like a 30-second sequence. The scene that you said when he was down and out and he was like still, I could hear. I thought he was gonna say I thought he was gonna say his classic line. I could go.
Yeah.
He says I could go on for days. Or what did he say?
Yeah, I could do this all day.
Yeah, I could do this all day. All day. I thought he was gonna say that, but he got up. He strapped on the half a shield, the half a shield that Thanos demolished, which was crazy. and then he stood up, and it was like that moment. I was like, in my head too, because the rumors were like Chris Evans is gonna be leaving. I'm thinking, oh, this is the best way for him to die. Like he's going against the whole army.
Right.
But when Falcon said, "Cap, can you hear me?" and then it came in and said, "On your left." That "on your left" was fan service.
Mm-hmm.
That was fan.
Yeah.
From Civil War. What's Civil War, right? Winter Soldier.
Yeah, Winter Soldier.
Winter Soldier. Sorry, Winter Soldier. And oh my gosh, tears came to my eyes. I'm not gonna lie to you. Like it was like tears of joy. Like it was just like one of those moments. Like yo, and everybody showed up. When everybody showed up, like I mentioned in Twitch, I said I completely forgot how much characters we've seen over the years. And see all of them pop up on the screen. I was like, oh my god, this is like the best movie I've ever seen in my life. The best money I've ever spent on a movie ever.
Yeah, and then when he finally said Avengers Assemble, everybody went nuts in the theater.
Man, they saved that moment. They saved that one, the Avengers Assemble moment. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was at the end of Civil War where he said Avengers, and everybody thought he was going to say Assemble. Remember that? Like, at the very end?
Yeah, that was actually in Age of Ultron.
Age of Ultron. See, I'm mixing them up. Age of Ultron, yeah. Everybody thought that he was going to say that. And they saved it for this movie. It was well done, man. Well done, honestly saying. I don't know what else to say in this movie. You know what I was thinking as I was listening to you guys, I'm trying to think of like where we are right now compared to where we were, 10 years ago, and then 10 years before that.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine this being the first Marvel movie. When I say this movie, I'm talking about Endgame. Imagine if Endgame is your first Marvel movie. You hadn't seen any of the other ones. You haven't been privileged to see all of the other ones. And there are people. There are a lot of people that this is their first movie. Yeah, exactly. So, they're getting all of these characters all at once. But, when I think about how this movie resonates with
Yeah,
Yeah,
Bill
that blew
Bixby.
up on TV, and that was like the closest to live action that you get for one of the prize characters. And just to see the evolution of the Hulk too is like it's really 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 cool because from him being just this guy who just gets angry to where he is now as a professor in the cinematic universe. It was a journey, to see that and to actually know all the different Hulks that came past.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to cut you off. You know what I wanted to say is that this movie, Endgame, was the type of movie that this is the first time I'm seeing it, this is the movie I want to see all the toys made from. Because
Exactly.
there's so many different iterations of all these different characters, from Hulk to Professor Hulk, Spider-Man in his Iron Spider suit, and I think what's really smart about Kevin Feige and everyone involved in the MCU is that they've been able to picture all of these characters in different manifestations of themselves, different identities of themselves. Whether it's like Spider-Man with his mask and Spider-Man without his mask. Like they really want to give you these different layers to their character that is marketable, even in the form of merchandising. So your favorite version of Tony Stark might be like one of his many 50 different types of suits, and we've seen so many of them.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of these new action figures that they have. I've always passed them and seen and said, wow, they really came a long ways with the action figures. As of right now, my son, he has when he goes to McDonald's to get him a happy meal, they have the Avengers action figures like collectibles. I don't know if you guys are aware of that.
I haven't seen them.
Yeah, they're like little, look like little mini trophies with them. We'll take a look. But we've been collecting them to the point where I just go in there and ask them which ones they have, and I buy them. It's just like I like the fact that they have so much characters, and it's like it's double. They have them in their quantum suits, and then they have them in their regular suits. And some of the toys, they actually got the arms may light up for. I think it was the Hulk. The arms lit up. And they have like different little little features to each one, which is really cool. You guys should check it out.
What's funny, as you mentioned the quantum suits, when I first saw them in the trailers, I was like, okay, it's fine. I don't love them, but I didn't hate them, but I didn't feel any type of way about them. And you know what? As I say that, I think subconsciously, I think I have the scars still from seeing the first X-Men movie, and they're very shitty uniforms that are just like all black, no character, no personality,
Right.
and that's not how I envision X-Men. So when I see the Avengers in these very not monochromatic, but this uniform, to see them in one standard uniform, regardless of what purpose it serves, it doesn't seem right because I've gotten so used to their identities without a uniform.
Right.
They all have their individual characteristics and outfits, and now and we've even seen changes. Like with Captain America. Captain America has a stealth suit. He had when he went rogue, he's got like his original Captain America suit.
Mm-hmm.
He's got the one with the helmet. He's got the one without the helmet. And now we see all of them in these quantum suits. It's just like whoa, 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 whoa. I didn't sign up for this. Yeah.
But that actually brings up an interesting point when you mention X-Men, because that was actually one of the reasons I cried at that moment when they brought all the heroes together at the end, because it just was dawning on me like how far these films had come from those early days of X-Men with the black leather Matrix style outfits, and the Incredible Hulk TV movies where they had Daredevil and they had Thor, but they were like kind of cheesed up and didn't look
Yeah,
anything like their comic book counterparts.
uh,
And those were days back then when you had to rely on the cartoons, you had to rely on the video games like Captain
yes.
America and the Avengers, the Spider-Man arcade game, like that stuff.
Even
That
the X Men ones.
Yeah, the phenomenal X-Men arcade game, you
Yeah,
know, that stuff was like what you had to rely on as a kid, as close as what you thought a movie would be. Because you would take those action figures, and I know for me, like I would do like Spider-Man 1 through 5, and every movie I would have in my head as I played with those like the Marvel action figures from Toy Biz. I was always trying to say like every movie he'll face like a different villain, and maybe he'll have like Captain America team up with him in one, and Iron Man in the second,
yeah,
and in my mind that's like kind of what I wanted to see. But when these actual movies finally did get made, other than Spider-Man and X-Men in terms of the storytelling and the performances, Hollywood just wasn't getting it right. They would take the comics and they would just completely change so many things. Sometimes make like hot shot casting because of whoever was the flavor of the month, and they would
yeah.
completely ruin the role. And you get left with a bunch of forgettable, mediocre crap. And it was just amazing how Feige from Iron Man 1 up until Endgame was able to like individually set up every character to be almost as
It's
close to their
amazing.
comic book counterpart, and you get invested in them emotionally to where
Yes.
you care about them by the end. Like that moment when Spider-Man and Iron Man finally reunited after the snap,
Yeah,
I cried at that moment too because I love that kid. I love Tom Holland in
yeah,
the role.
yeah. Tom
And
Holland is really good.
yeah, and you're invested in that journey, and that's something that I think the older films just didn't quite have.
Yeah, they didn't. The character development wasn't really like there for each character back in the day. As of now, what Kevin Feige has done, and to mention what you said, to go over what you said, right, with the old movies, like how they didn't look like it. Like I think it was a mandate with Kevin Feige for all of the characters to look like the comic book characters,
Right.
because even come on, like this trailer that I seen for new Spider-Man, the way that Mysterio looks, he looks just like the comic to me, or even better, you
Yeah.
know. It's amazing what they're doing now, and I tip my hat off to them because I enjoy every last movie like a child. It really, it's like a time machine. It's like I'm going into the quantum realm. Like every time I go in there, it's like I feel like I'm a child again, getting hyped. Like that 1 year since Infinity War to the end game, I was like anticipating this movie like no other. It was like the ice cream truck was outside or something. I was really, I was really like really synced up for it.
Yeah, it's I can't even believe an entire year has gone by either, because my son watches all of the conspiracy videos, and I watch them with him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
We go through all of them, and we pick scenes apart, and we're just like we're mentally exhausting ourselves with all the minutia of these films, and you can't ask for a better um, brand of quality control than Marvel. Like
they get
they get it right, and they're you can't think of another brand that, or at least media company that is, or entertainment brand or production company, whatever you want to call it. They are known for their quality control, and they want to deliver the best product possible. Um, Even when we debate for hours on end about what we're seeing in these trailers, because we watch these videos on YouTube all the time, and it's like all of this speculation, and at the end of the day, none of like 80% of that trailer is not what's in the movie, or it's not
yeah.
exactly how it's
Exactly.
presented.
I love how they throw us off though. I love how they throw
I
us
know,
off.
man. you know, I think I told you guys that making a movie in 2019 with the internet, forget about it.
Yeah. No, that was one thing they did a very good job with, was really keeping this film so tight-lipped for 1 year. I mean, if we thought that Infinity War was going to have all kinds of things that they didn't want to reveal, hence they had to shoot like fake scenes just to throw people off. Here was a case where they didn't even want to say if any of the dead characters were going to come back. Even in the action figure lines, they held off on releasing like a new Black Panther or a new Spider-Man until the movie came out, because they wanted to make everybody believe that, yeah, these guys are totally gone for good. And even though in the back of our minds we know, well, there's another Spider-Man coming, they're definitely going to do another Black Panther. Um, but it's just the idea of what sacrifices were going to be made to get them back. And this movie delivered in that way. And I just love the fact that the trailers, they only showed really just maybe the first 25 minutes of the movie, if anything. They don't really show you anything that happens once they go into the past and doing the whole like Back to the Future Part 2 thing, which I knew they were going to do, going back to the past movies and, changing history in such a weird way. And I love the fact that they even reference every time travel movie just to kind of, say, well, it's not going to be anything like that stuff. This is its own thing.
That was really a really good, cool writing. I like how they did that.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was really cool. When they said Back to the Future, I was like on my seat, like watching, like what are you saying? But I love how they spent it where it was like it's not, you don't change the past. Your past is not your future, and you just it raised the conversation of multiverses. So that's cool. Like I when they did that, it doesn't affect all the old properties too much. You know what I'm saying? So because I was in my head, I was like, so if they go back in time and they change something, that means the invasion in New York didn't happen the right way. But then they answered. They did it in a way where they could borrow from those places, and I love how they went back and returned the stone. They didn't show it, but like basically Cap went back to return everything that was taken.
I'll say this much now: they've been able to, Marvel has been able to rewrite their own history again. They realized that, okay, we've come this far. We did and we undid a lot of things, but now we made it so that we can just basically start from scratch again and kind of like make this up as we go along. And everyone is pretty much bought into this because we defined the rules of time travel.
Yeah.
It's crazy as that sounds, because like it's not like they're just trying to lead you astray. They're just like, oh, we can do whatever we want. We're Marvel. We're gonna make this movie, and you've already bought your ticket. You've already signed up. So you've invested this much time in it. You're in for the long haul.
Mm-hmm.
No, I really think it's beyond that. I think that they know what they're doing, and we know that they consult with a lot of people who study quantum physics and have an understanding of how this stuff would work. But really, they could really take you on another adventure now, because I don't know. It almost seems. I honestly don't even want to think about how it's going to be done anymore, because it gets more confusing.
Well, these recent Spider-Man trailers are now pretty much showing that the next phase is definitely going to be the multiverse concept. So, without a doubt, I mean, as you guys already know, Disney bought Fox, so now they own the X-Men and the Fantastic Four, and we're going to see those guys probably in another 3 or 4 years. So, I mean, now, if that's the case, it totally opens up all kinds of possibilities that we didn't have before. And it just, I mean, I can imagine the weight of what Kevin Feige has to now put together, because before it was just whoever they had the licenses to. And, they only had like Iron Man and Cap and Thor and the rest of them. And we only just lucked out in the last couple of years where, Sony, obviously, they had dropped the ball with Spider-Man, and they knew all the fans really wanted was not another reboot, not another telling of the origin story. They want to see Spider-Man fight along the Avengers, and to their credit, they were able to be humble enough to make that deal to see him in the MCU, and they've done such a fantastic job with him. So, you know,
and it works out for both parties, man. It really does.
yeah, no, I mean, the Homecoming was a huge hit, and
Yeah,
yes, it would have been lovely to see the origin story play out within the context of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But at this point, if you've told that story twice, then nobody's going to really want to sit through that again. So it just made sense to see, a kid like Tom Holland who has the best traits of being a young Peter Parker that will grow into the role over time, but also being the Spider-Man we grew up with the wisecracks and the spider sense and all the little gadgets that he has that were in the comic book. You know, so Feige really did his homework to go back through the material and find the essence of what made that character work, which is he was a teenager, he's a nerd. And to
yeah,
make that fit in the context of a modern day millennial, he knocked it out the park with that.
yeah. And you know what I realized, when I started, paying attention, that Feige basically he worked on the first X-Men live action movie.
Yes.
Yeah, he did. He did some work on that. So I feel like from him doing that, because the first X-Men movie, despite the costumes and stuff, we were all hyped to see that movie because that's the first time we saw a live action X-Men movie, and the fact that he had his hand in that, and now he has the characters at his disposal to make a full-fledged story movie or whatever you want to call it. I feel like it's in the best hands ever. Like if we were hype about certain things with the X-Men, I can imagine what he's gonna do now. Like complete confidence.
Well, yeah.
I'm looking at the way that first of all, Andre, you brought up a really great point about Spider-Man as this millennial who has all of this technology and their toys basically.
Mm-hmm.
Technology are his toys and they're his gadgets, and he's amazed at them, but he's also he has that kind of like a maker mentality where he can like manipulate these things. So he's like partner, engineer, cool guy, young at heart, very curious, and he's able to make these. They're not just handed down to him as a tool. Now they're a part of his lifestyle. You know what I mean? And I like the idea of now as a consumer, we can I get excited about like if maybe this exists. I get excited about the possibility of like the toy line expanding or focusing on that element of Spider-Man. Like the way Batman had like all these different vehicles and gadgets, or G.I. Joe had all these different accessories, like toys that have accessories and unique accessories that are functional to the toy, really bring out another element of imagination or really expand your imagination. So I would hope that like whoever is designing Spider-Man and more of these figures for let's say Phase 4 of the Marvel Universe really doubles down on Spider-Man and all these other figures or characters that are now going to be more accessorized.
Yeah, and I'll also say another thing about Kevin Feige because, it's true. He definitely was involved with a lot of the early Marvel films going as far back as X-Men, but he also was sort of like a co-producer because there were other people like Avi Arad who ran Toy Biz, and he actually was the one that had sold a lot of the licenses to the different studios back in the '90s when Marvel went bankrupt. And so Feige was really like the only voice in the room that was always trying as best as he could to get the accuracy of the comic books to the screen. So he fought for things like for Wolverine's hairstyle to look like the Logan hairstyle in the comic.
Yeah.
He fought for things in Spider-Man and in the other movies. And sometimes, because he wasn't at the time the most experienced person, sometimes that voice would get shut out. And that's why, not only did you have like the Matrixy looking X-Men, but I think about it later on with the second Fantastic Four movie, Rise of the Silver Surfer, where on one hand they made the Silver Surfer look amazing in that film. That
Yeah.
that
They
whole
did.
chase scene with him and Human
Johnny
Torch,
Storm.
yeah, that
Yeah.
was the best thing in the whole movie, with the
Yeah.
trailer and all. But the rest of the movie sucked, and the
It
fact that
did.
they even decided to put Galactus in there, but make him a storm cloud because they thought his original design looked laughable. Now you look at something like Guardians of the Galaxy, and they do that stuff all the time, and people are not laughing. I mean, you see the dough that film is making,
I don't
and
understand how they could think that when like properties like Star Wars were around before that. And they did such weird characters for that. Like just do the character the way it's in the source material. Just get it. Just make it look right. Like what are you doing this next pseudo villain that we don't even know, like in the comics, and you expect everybody to be like, oh, okay, this is a new iteration.
They reimagine the character.
Yeah, we don't need that. We don't need you to change our memory of the character. Just put it how it is. We don't want to see our characters messed up. We want to get them right.
yeah, I mean, like one of my old friends, Dan Poole, who made a fan made Spider Man movie back in the 90s. I mean, he would always say, like, look, everything is in these panels in every one of these comic books. That's the only thing you have to make. I mean, I get, yeah, you're trying to bring in a new audience and, trying to like familiarize them with these characters, but everything is in the panels. You don't have to change much. Now, something like, okay, like when Daredevil came out back in '03, there was no like big size white dude that could play the Kingpin, so they had to get Michael Clark Duncan, who I thought was a fine choice given what they had to work with. But then you look at that Netflix show and what Vincent D'Onofrio did.
Oh
Holy
my
shit,
God.
he was more than just the Kingpin. I mean, he actually gave soul to that guy.
Yeah.
And that was actually one thing I will say. I mean, this kind of like veers off the point, but you know, what would have actually made that ending scene extra special, even though I'm not disappointed at all. I thought it was great. But in Endgame, if they had those Netflix characters come out, like
That would
when
have been. I would have blew my mind.
I would have waited for like Doctor Strange, like to say, okay, is this everybody here? And the guy's like, oh, you wanted more? And then all of a sudden they start coming out.
I would have pissed myself. Couldn't lie to
You know, you guys are the first ones to mention that. That's crazy. I'd never thought that. To be honest with you, I've never invested time in watching those Netflix specials. I watched like maybe 3 or 4 episodes of Luke Cage season one and like 2 episodes of Daredevil, and that was it. That's all I watched.
Yeah, I've watched. I didn't watch the last season of Daredevil, but the Punisher was pretty good.
Pusher was excellent, and John Bernthal really rocked it.
Punisher was really good. The first season, Jessica.
Jessica Jones.
Jessica Jones was pretty cool. Second one, you could do it out, but I definitely was a fanatic with this whole cinematic universe. I thought that they were in the cinematic universe because they reference stuff. Because even like the TV show Agents of Shield, I still watched that like literally like every season. I just think I didn't see the last 2 seasons because they would reference stuff that happens in the movie, like in Civil War where they had the undercover Hydra agents.
Yeah.
They did that they did that in the actual TV show,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, wow, that's cool. And even I watched a couple of episodes of Agent Carter. With Peggy. No, Peggy Carter.
She had an intro.
Yeah, it was only 2 seasons.
Yeah, and I even watched a couple of that. So from there they had Jarvis in there. They had Jarvis in that.
Mm-hmm.
When I seen Jarvis in Endgame, I was like, oh wow, it's the first time I've ever seen them take a character from the TV
Yeah, I was surprised about that. And too, the one thing I also really enjoy about all these films is when they take the older actors and they de-age them to look like they did back in their prime. So like in Ant-Man, you had Michael Douglas look the way he did in Wall Street, when he
That's so crazy.
yeah,
I
when he's
still
like
don't get
confronting
how
all
they're
the
doing
shield
that.
agents. Or even like I thought the two things that were also crazy were Civil War when they de-aged Robert Downey Jr. and the best I think was in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 when they made young Kurt Russell. That blew my mind. Like holy shit. That's Kurt Russell from Escape from New York. I mean, even when I saw Ant-Man and they de-aged Michael Douglas and even in the sequel they did to Michelle Pfeiffer, now it made me want to see like their film. Like, could they be DH for an entire movie and see like Ant Man in the '80s as Hank Pym?
That
I
would
would
be
pay to see
something.
that.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Because the technology is crazy how they're doing for real. Like the way this how Michael Douglas looked in Endgame was like, wow. They even went younger with him.
Yeah,
Like that was really cool how they did that. Like, and it doesn't look too cheesy. Like you know what they're doing, but at the same time, it looks great. Cause come on, we are invested in like Thanos. Like Thanos is the like. Let's talk about Thanos
yeah.
for a
Let's talk
second
about Thanos.
because Thanos is hands down top three villains of villain ever. Like as far as comic books is concerned, he is a badass villain. He has such depth in his character. Like I feel like the way that they built him, not well, not say built him, the way that they wrote his story, you have some type of empathy for him too. It's not like you're completely mad at him. You kind of understand where he's going with his idea. You don't really agree, but it's like one of those things. It's not like just a dude that just wants to dominate the world. He's actually he has merit in what he's trying to do. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if you guys know the same way.
No, I definitely think that he had an incredible arc in Infinity War where he really was like the protagonist of the movie because he was the one with the objective and everybody else was trying to stop him from getting all the gems, but he kept outsmarting everybody left and right. And even to the very end, before you thought Thor had him when he got him with the Stormbreaker, and all he had to do was snap because he didn't get his head. And like I got to give credit to Josh Brolin. He was the one guy I would have never pictured playing that part because when I think of Josh Brolin, I think of The Goonies. I think of
The
like
Goonies,
yeah, like more of his dramatic stuff in movies like Milk and Sicario. But to see him give life to that character, I mean, he was very Shakespearean about it, and he really
just
brought
yeah,
like some depth that a lot of the villains in these films haven't had. I think if you have to talk about like the top villains in this in MCU, he's definitely up there. And then I would also say Tom Hiddleston's Loki and the way he evolved over each film. And
yeah.
I can't go without saying Michael B. Jordan's Killmonger in Black
Oh
Panther.
my gosh, Gilmore.
Yeah, bro.
Like that was
Yeah.
totally unexpected.
I mean, yes. When they, honestly speaking, Marvel sees something that we don't see because when they casted Michael B. Jordan as Killmonger, I wasn't on board with that. I was like, what? I was like, he's gonna be a villain. I could not wrap my head around him being a villain. And that movie sure changed my mind. I was like, wow, really put his foot in that one.
He put both feet in it.
And that's another great thing that Marvel has really done. Like I go as far back as not even Black Panther, but go back to Civil War. And if you notice how many black superheroes were in that film, it's really mind boggling. And nobody really ever talks about that.
Yeah,
But
no.
that's another thing we never had as kids was we had Spider-Man, we had Captain
Very
America,
true.
we had the proverbial white heroes that we looked up to and appreciated, but there wasn't a lot of love for like the Black Panthers or the Falcon type characters, not even War Machine. And then to
Right.
see those guys get a lot of depth and importance within the context of the films. I mean, they really paid it off with Black Panther in the way that that character and just the overall movie has inspired this whole new generation of
Yeah,
moviegoers. And
Shuri and Okoye and all of that. Like, it's beautiful to see us being represented on the screen.
yeah, and it's
And
just
you know what I love too is that they're creating a universe around Black Panther. It's like yes, there's the MCU, but I feel like the way that they introduce Wakanda, it's pretty incredible as like this nation in its own right, and for better or for worse, this nation is like all these other characters rely on Wakanda, so they come to Wakanda whenever they need something.
right.
So yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
it just shifted the culture completely.
completely shifted, and I mean it's now like it's talked about in the same breath as Infinity War and Endgame. Like Black Panther, it's like Black Panther, not in this order, but it's like Spider-Man. Like well, at one point it was Iron Man. Iron Man was the linchpin to everything,
Yeah, that
but
first one. Oh,
and then Spider-Man is gonna be the next linchpin for all of these next films. But right behind it is Black Panther, and it's just as important in this entire universe.
yeah, and he's not a vigilante. He's not a special agent. I mean, he's a freaking king, and everybody looks up to him and respects him.
Exactly.
And you've never seen that on screen like that before.
With as much power as he has, yeah, yeah,
the technology that they have, honestly, like, the technology of Wakanda, just the stuff that I love that they made Shuri so smart. I mean, well, she is smart, period, in the comic book. I mean, but I just love that to see that representation on the screen, a young black girl you see, that you don't have to be an Instagram model to literally be dope. You can actually be into science and stuff like that. So you can, you know, it's one of those things that Marvel is really like doing. And I'm hearing rumors that they're about to introduce openly gay Marvel characters. Did you hear about that?
Yes, one of the movies they're planning to do in Phase Four is the Elementals. Not the Eternals, and
Eternals, yeah.
I've never read the comic books. I'm not that familiar with them, to be honest. But I know it was created in 1976 by Jack Kirby, and it's really mostly like a lot of cosmic characters that supposedly have some involvement in the creation of the whole multiverse in Marvel. And I believe one of the hero characters in it, or maybe the main hero character, is supposed to be homosexual. So now that's what you're going to probably be seeing more of in Phase Four is more female-led movies like Captain Marvel had done. They're already looking at an Asian character in the form of Shang Chi, which I've never read before, but
I've never heard that either.
yeah, he was
Me
like a
either.
character from the '70s or the '80s. It's sort of like
I,
their
I,
answer to Bruce Lee.
I have complete courage in that because I wasn't familiar with Guardians of the Galaxy. I was going to that movie just to see it. I walked out that door and I'm like, what the hell? This is a really good movie. Like I was like, that moment at the end when they all held the Infinity Stone was like, I was like, yo, this is so dope. Like I feel like uh, they haven't let me down yet. I mean, movies are you can always have two sides to movies. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be bad. People like it. They don't like it. You know. But I feel like they have a plan, and I know that it's gonna play out. Even if they introduce some character I've never heard of before, I feel like it's gonna feel better.
Well, even if the character itself is so foreign to you, they're gonna find a way to sell you on it by virtue of the actor.
Mm-hmm.
Like Chris Pratt, for instance. He built his presence through TV and slowly in film. But he's had breakout roles. I mean, as far as something. But yeah, I guess I'm trying to remember where in the timeline these movies happened because they all happened like back to back to back.
Yeah.
So you had the Lego movie, you had the Jurassic Park movies, and then you also have Guardians of the Galaxy. So I think the the timeline of those movies were all his breakout roles, and they all prepared him and they prepared us for Guardians of the Galaxy because that movie was so critical to that series has been so critical to the entire MCU that like it had to do well. That movie that franchise could not flop because there's so much writing on it. So they have to have like a really strong lead, and that's Chris Pratt.
Yeah, and the fact that Marvel really wanted to take us to space, like they really wanted us to sell our mind on, going to space with these characters because, we've always had, Captain America, Iron Man, they're all Earth based, and New York based at that too. And then they had also, what is the character? They had Thor who was in Asgard, they went to the space type thing, but they didn't spend time like in different realms of the space. But in the first door, they did break down in different realms, which was pretty cool. And I love that they stuck to that map. And basically, when the Guardians of the Galaxy was introduced, we was able to see these different places, and it really is a universe, and it really takes you down like in a roller coaster of different characters. Even now with Captain Marvel, she's all over the universe, which is pretty cool, man. Like, and I want to say also, what do you guys? I mean, I know you and I spoke about this part in the movie, but when they did that, like that scene with all the women like coming together like a force, and they had all of them like you seen all of the women on screen. I thought that was like amazing as well. Like they had these little chaos in this whole movie. It was just, I felt like I saw 3 movies.
Well, yeah. Look, the movie's 3 hours and 1 minute long, so I feel like they were making a conscious effort in every scene to give you something that you hadn't seen before, that you want to see. It's like you have 80 characters or something, and you're like, all right, what do we want to see out of these 80 characters? You want to see Iron Man and Spider-Man team up. You want to see Captain America and Thor team up. Well, you want to see that. You're not expecting to see that. Marvel wants you to see that. You're not expecting to see that, and then when you see it, you're like, wow, they really just did that. and then all the ladies, like when they were talking about the billing of this movie, and they had like all these individuals casted for the movie, you're like, okay, how is the Wasp gonna fit into this movie? Like, how you gonna give her dialogue? What words is she gonna have? Everybody gets at least like 3 words in the whole movie.
They get a moment.
Yeah, but you know what's so funny about it though? Like you mentioned the Wasp. When she came in, right, and she said it was like her one line. She said, "Okay, we got it, Cap."
Mm-hmm.
It was actually it was a callback to when she had the conversation in the car with Ant-Man saying, "Oh, you call him Cap?"
Yeah.
Cap. It's like every little thing that they did was like a callback that made you like, oh my gosh, like it was just like it was just a good payoff. And I just heard, I don't know if you heard too, like 2 days ago, like that last scene with Iron Man saying Iron Man. Yeah, he didn't do that the first time around.
I just heard about that today. Yeah.
I was like, what? I was like, that was things like that. It was I think Joel Stover that convinced them. It's like you have to go back and do that. It's like that's the best way to end it. Like, and it's the truth. Like when I knew he was gonna say it. Like I was in the theater when Thanos said I'm inevitable or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I and when he said and I am, and I said, yeah,
Yeah.
Iron Man. But he wasn't good. That was like uh, I get more worked up thinking about that movie now. And people look at me like I'm crazy when I talk about this movie, but I'm like, come on, come on.
Well, you know what it is? It's one of the few movies that if not the only movie, the only series of films that acknowledge the where the heroes acknowledge their alter ego. You know, Batman has done it in his own right, but most of the other DC films don't really acknowledge, where the characters don't openly acknowledge their alter ego, and they don't. And if they do, it's more like it's it's more for effect. And in this case, for Iron Man, his was for effect. But I think one of the interesting things that I saw in one of these, I guess it was New Rock Stars, they talked about this on YouTube, where the characters in the MCU mostly refer to themselves by their real names instead
Right.
of like their superhero names. So when you look at like Spider-Man, he's constantly introducing himself as Peter and or Peter Parker, and other characters are like, well, Doctor Strange is like, I'm Doctor Strange, or you know, Captain America calls Captain Marvel Danvers, or someone else calls her Carol. So, and I think that's all tied into Civil War because in the comic books they have their real identities exposed, so they pretty much refer to each other by their real identities instead of their superhero names.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a. I think one of the reasons why the Marvel films work versus Warner Brothers with their attempt with making a DC cinematic universe, there's a human element with the Avengers in the way that they interact with one another. Like if you go back to something like the original Avengers, they don't all like band together and suddenly like, yeah, we're a super team and we got to go stop Loki and destroy the aliens that are coming down. No, it's sort of like you look at them when they're in the shield ship, and they're all kind of having like these normal conversations with one another. Like the part when Bruce Banner and Tony Stark are talking about like how they got their powers, and Stark telling Hulk, you should kind of embrace the fact that you have this big guy in you because that's the only way that's keeping you alive. And it's sort of like those real conversations that you see in all the films that make it more fun and more relatable to watch them. Whereas with the DC movies, everybody is so overpowered except for Batman that it just feels like, oh, we're just all banding together and we're just gonna, save the day. We're gonna go save Superman and whatnot. And it's not relatable to me. It's just like
Because
that
in
sort of blue
DC,
collar mentality that
yeah,
works for Marvel.
in DC they're too powerful for their own good. They can't relate to each other because they're so powerful, and it becomes competitive. Whereas in the MCU, they see each other as equals.
But that's
Exactly.
good. That is good storytelling because you know let's be honest. This franchise could have went down the drain bad, horribly bad if they did it wrong. And we gotta credit that to the writers, to Kevin Feige. Like it's done properly. They could have been a wrong turn somewhere. They could come on. The first the most they're including the Hulk movies in this cinematic universe and with Edward Norton.
Yeah.
And that was like if you had to and that was like in the beginning stage. That was right after Iron Man.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you didn't have confidence in what they were doing with Iron Man, if you didn't see Iron Man first, let's say that. If you didn't see Iron Man first, and they led with the Hulk, we would have been like, I don't know, I don't know about this, because that first Hulk movie, I was kind of invested in it, because I was like, oh, this is a big take. Edward Norton's doing it, and basically, he had a way to. It was like he had a way to control his anger. He knew what it was, and all that stuff. It was kind of cool, but when it came to the CGI,
Mm-hmm.
it was like, what am I watching? Like Abomination and everything. I was like, in Harlem. It was just like a little bit too much.
Well, nobody
So
knew how to use the Hulk properly back then. You go back to like the Ang Lee movie where they tried to make it like a Greek tragedy, and he was like too oversized, too green,
yeah,
and
yeah,
the movie people fell asleep on that. And then with the Norton film, I mean Edward Norton. I love him as an actor because I love Fight Club and I love American History X, but there was something kind of dry about him, and his Hulk was the same thing. You know, he would just smash shit up and then he'd just go back to being Banner. What I like about Mark Ruffalo is that yes, there's a little bit of like a throwback to Bill Bixby from the TV show where he's sort of like, he's trying to help people, but there's also like a nervousness about him where he doesn't want to get too angry. But at the same time, you know, Ruffalo makes him like a ticking time bomb. Like, just don't fuck with this guy or else he's going to come out. But over time, he learns to embrace the Hulk. And, you see, I think he stole Endgame in some ways because I loved his scenes, like when he's in the truck with Rocket Raccoon and giving a little taco to Ant-Man. Little touches like that
yeah,
just,
yeah.
it came
I mean,
out. Yeah.
I feel like his character was done well in Endgame, but there's a lot, like I sort of mentioned, there's a lot of people that were didn't like that he was in like he did Hulk out, and
He never had his revenge moment.
yeah, he
Yeah.
had his revenge mode on Thanos, and he on the battlefield really, if you really think about it, you didn't see the Hulk get busy like in that last scene. He came and he showed up, but you didn't see him get busy. First, you could say he was hurt. He couldn't really get busy because he did the first snap. But at the same time, he didn't get busy. And you know what? I think it was I came to this realization. I went to tech shop books to tell y'all. I
Mm-hmm.
think the reason why they didn't give him screenplay, I think it might be payback for Mark Ruffalo, like spoiling,
Oh, yeah.
because I'm like maybe they did that on purpose. Maybe it was like, okay, we'll get him in there, we'll get him in there, and not give him enough screen time because in the back. Because honestly, like in this movie, him as Professor Hulk was is pretty dope. But I honestly say I didn't see him like do classic Hulk stuff. Like even when Black Widow died, I thought the regular Hulk was gonna come out. I thought the regular Hulk was gonna like come out and then I'm like, oh my gosh, I got this problem.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I think they're holding out. It's kind of like they're waiting and waiting and waiting. They're holding out with Hulk for his next breakout moment because think about it. He's been suppressed for so long, and we know that he can have a hair trigger, but I think because Mark Ruffalo has or Banner has such control over him. Um, it's going to take something very, 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 very extreme to bring him back, to bring the Hulk back out. Excuse me. So, we've seen him take a beating from Thanos. We've seen him, kind of like the way Thor has been through a lot too. So you have to come. So like Hulk is the next one in line who is just constantly being battered physically and emotionally. And I think the loss of Black Widow is actually the last straw. And I think once he comes to grips with the fact that she's gone and that she's the only person that can bring him back to being Banner, I think the next time he does blow up, it's going to be hard to turn him back into Banner. And we're gonna see the Hulk like in full force again, the way we did in Thor Ragnarok.
Yeah, one thing we haven't seen in the films yet, we haven't seen Grey Hulk from the comic books. So I feel like that would be another step to go in a future movie.
I mean, I like how he's speaking to Thor in Asgard.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a scene where Thor held him. He's like, "Get your hand off me," but he did it so calm, like he just had this one thing where he said, "Get your hands off of me." In my head, I'm like, I'm thinking, oh, maybe he's gonna about like Hulk out. Like you always, with the Hulk, you think that he's always gonna go be good, you know, like it's every little thing. Even when he's speaking to the what's her name, the woman from
Oh, the ancient one.
the ancient one, yeah. I thought he was gonna Hulk out. I mean, that thing when she slapped him back, looks like she boxed him one time. Like, yo, just chill out.
But that's my point. Look at how many times he was on the edge, and you thought he was gonna really, revert back to the old Hulk, and he didn't because Banner's still in control again. So I think there's gonna come a point where when he comes back, he's gonna be as ferocious as he was in Thor Ragnarok. Because I mean, look, Thor Ragnarok wasn't that long ago. It was like about a year and change, and that was a really great film, and
Yeah.
it really showed two sides of Hulk that we never really saw before. His more calm Hulk version of himself, but still very naive and dumb in a lot of ways. Um, but with the balance of Thor, that was a good Hulk movie. For lack of a better word.
Yeah, it was. They really did their thing with that one. It's just the fact that he's gonna be with the Guardians of the Galaxy. I feel like it's gonna be like the best of both worlds. If we get that next film, it's gonna really go in a great direction. And I'm hyped. I know we don't know what to expect in this new phase that's coming, but at the same time, we know that the story's gonna be good. Even remember the theory I texted both you guys about it, the Namor thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think they're gonna go in that direction.
Well, we have Comic-Con coming up, like later. I mean, I guess end of the summer. So I think, wait, is it end of summer or is it like in June or July?
It's going to be the end of July.
End of July. So I think we're gonna get a big announcement after Spider-Man: Homecoming hits and after Comic-Con. I think that's gonna be two major turning points for announcements, and we're gonna see. I think we're gonna see the future. We're gonna see the future. We're gonna see Phase 4. We're also gonna see the future of merchandising in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Oh yeah.
They're gonna ramp it up heavy.
Yeah, because remember they brought out that schedule a long time ago where we seen these different movies coming out. So I feel like that's what we're gonna get with this one. We all know that on the docket we're gonna have a new, like we said before, we're gonna have a new Black Panther. We're gonna have another Guardians of the Galaxy, and I love that James Gunn is back for that.
Yes.
Also, we're gonna have we know we're gonna have another Doctor Strange movie.
Mm-hmm.
And all the spin-offs that are coming on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
Right. That's just another subscription. I don't know. Oh man.
I'm leaning on it because they got some pretty exciting stuff coming up for that.
Well, not to cut you off, Chris, but they said 8 films are being announced. 8 films will carry us into 2022. So, you mentioned most of them. I think there's one, though, that I think we're missing. Oh, Black Widow.
Yeah, Black Widow, I think, is going to be next year. I heard they actually started shooting it.
No way.
You know what's cool, too? That we are getting another Marvel movie. We're going to get the Phoenix this year, too.
Well, that's the end of the Fox run of.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, even though I know it's the last one, I'm gonna see it regardless.
The jury's still out to me on that one. I just tried to explain the X-Men movies to my son the other day. He was like, what is the X-Men movies? Like he knows about the Phoenix Saga, but he was like, why don't people talk about the X-Men movies? I was like, well, it's really hard to explain because there's a lot of really good points and a lot of really bad points, and it was like right when they started figuring it out, they dropped the ball, and when they restarted, they started figuring it out, and they dropped the ball again. And I don't know, maybe I'm just so overly critical of it, but I just want them to just finish it, just get it over with, and hit the reset button one last time.
Yeah, for me, I think that when they did Days of Future Past and they kind of undid the last couple of films that I thought were kind of lackluster, I was very happy with the way that turned out.
Yeah,
Just
me
from
too.
us bridging the old cast with the new cast and undoing the timeline, and then when Deadpool hit, I mean, forget it, that was incredible and certainly was a game changer for comic book movies, period. And Logan, the way that that was able to kind of be bold in its storytelling, to go the R-rated direction, let Hugh Jackman get that final amazing performance as Wolverine. They did a hell of a job with that. But I also kind of felt the same time when they did Apocalypse. Um, I started to feel the fatigue. I felt like maybe it's time to change it up a bit because now I got what I wanted. And just now we're like in 2016, continuing with a franchise that started in 2000, and now it's starting to just become kind of stale for me. I felt like
Yeah,
at that point I needed a refresher. And then when I look at Dark Phoenix, it just feels like it's just going the same route. It's like
same route.
I'm
Yeah,
done.
yeah. It's
But yo,
well,
why is Mystique part of the X-Men? I mean, that's the elephant in the room to me. Like, why is she such a central character to all of this?
yeah.
uh
Well,
I think the best way I could put it is, you know, they put Jennifer Lawrence in there, and she was already, kind of like the next it girl at the time when they first cast her in First Class. And then as her star status went up with Hunger Games, they started to almost talk like she might be the next central X-Men character when Hugh Jackman would leave. But then she started catching an attitude, and clearly now she's kind of like phoning it in. So obviously she's gonna die in the movie. You see it in the trailer.
Yeah.
But I think they were expecting to make it a bigger deal for her in the role, and now she's starting to get that. Like, I just won an Oscar. I'm kind of want to just fulfill my contract and get the hell out.
Yeah, she's
yeah, you see,
fizzled
you
out
gotta get
very
people who are
fast.
vested in the character for one, and on top of that, you gotta get, it's really the storyline. Just because somebody's a big star shouldn't just like center the whole damn movie around this one character. Because it's not a pivotal character, really. Like I don't know.
Well,
When
that
you
would be
look at
my
the way,
hope. Yeah, that
no,
that
you
would
go.
that would be my hope when the X Men do come into the MCU. Because one thing I don't want to see is, like when they bring whoever ends up playing Wolverine. I don't want Wolverine to just be like the guy. Like you have so many other characters like Cyclops and other characters that haven't been used well in the past movies. I want to see them have some importance and let them be on the same equal plane as Wolverine. And I feel like that would be the best way to like have more of a group that one day they could have like an Avengers versus X-Men type of movie. It's not just like, oh well, it's Wolverine against everybody. You know what I mean? Like Wolverine shouldn't be always the central figure.
Right.
Well, I think what what I think also what you're aiming at, and what I'm trying to say also is that the the MCU as it stands right now has a lot of really big names, but they don't have a lot of really big name actors that are in their prime, so to speak. They're not necessarily past their prime. It's just that they they are they're established and they have a track record, and they're all very good actors, but they're not the type of actors that are like trendy type of actors. They're not actors that are still looking to play other roles right now. It's like, you get an actor who wants to take on this role and they see the long run with it. They see that this is more than just a one movie commitment. This is
But
like a
when you
six
think of
movie commitment
Mhm.
or
when
more.
you think about it too, you think about it, they get these characters that are not like with Robert Downey Jr. Like you look at him like he's a god now, but where he was when he first got casted for Iron Man, he wasn't like the it guy anymore. You know,
No, he's well past his prime.
Yeah. So,
On a comeback.
Yeah, they get these people that they know. This is gonna be like their thing. You know, like it's not one of those things where like when they get these characters, they're like too big for the character. You know, like it's kind of like when they casted like in the DC universe when they casted Will Smith for
Deadshot.
so yeah, like he's bigger than the movie to me. Like I feel like most people came to see that movie before Will Smith. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
I think the MCU is very, well, Marvel Studios is very conscious of how they pair actors with directors.
mm-hmm.
They want people to work with each other based on chemistry and what they're willing to bring to the role. When you have this new relationship you're trying to form and it just doesn't seem like it's natural, it shows.
Well, they learned their lesson early on with both Iron Man and Incredible Hulk. And what I mean by that is, I mean, you mentioned Downey, and Downey pretty much was at the time trying to come back after his drug addiction and a string of not so great movies. And then that suddenly brought him back in a huge way. Like, I would say the ultimate Hollywood comeback. But people also forget you had Terrence Howard playing Jim Rhodes, War Machine, and at that time, I mean, he was coming off of Hustle and Flow and Crash. He was looked at as the next big thing. But then we would find out afterwards that he had a pretty big ego on the set. He didn't get along with Jon Favreau, the director, and he got fired in favor of Don Cheadle for Iron Man 2. And so you had somebody that was a little more humble, but still known enough that somebody like Cheadle was going to make the commitment. And then the same thing with Edward Norton, who was already went into Hulk as a huge star, but he also had a reputation for being difficult with directors and, you know, trying to rewrite the scripts or re-edit the movies. And that backfired because Marvel wasn't just going to play ball with him like that. And he wasn't going to commit to more films. Yeah. So, you know, they made the right call to kind of cut him off after that.
I'm getting skeptical because I hear rumors about Angelina Jolie coming in for one of those movies, the new, I don't know if it's the Elemental.
Yeah,
the
Eternals.
Yeah.
Sorry, the Eternals.
Yeah. But yo, guys, this has been great. I want to do this again.
Yeah.
I don't know how you want to take this, but I have to skedaddle at this point.
Okay, well,
We covered a lot.
yeah. All right, so we'll wrap it up real quickly. So usually, like at the end of every show, I like to talk to everybody, like just very quickly, what kind of toys that they wish they would have had as a kid, that were not made at that time. And it could be stuff that's made now that obviously we're too old to have. So I would say for me, when it comes to Marvel, I actually would have wanted like an action figure of the Dolph Lundgren Punisher. I know he didn't have the skull in that movie, and the movie wasn't all that great, but I remember watching that all the time and quoting it. So I know I would have wanted to have that, and I probably would have wanted that cheap-looking Captain America from 1990 as an action figure, and the Red Skull that came with it. So what would you guys would have wanted?
Out of all the characters, I think that, honestly speaking, we were talking about accessories and stuff like that. I was thinking, honestly, I really like how they did the whole, I'm not gonna say the whole universe, but how they did Black Panther. I like what they're doing, what they did with them. So the characters like the Black Panther, I would have wanted what's that as a good. Are you saying from back in the day, or you mean just any character?
Well, really from back in the day, but if you wanted to mention, like, if the movies were made back then, like, if you wanted, like, a Black Panther action figure that would have been made, yeah.
Well, that too, honestly speaking, like the Black even just how they have like with Shuri. I know it's like more for girls, but those blasts that she has,
Yeah.
those are pretty cool. Like I think that it just just those action figures would have been pretty cool to have as a kid.
Rich?
So, Andre, early on you mentioned Toy Biz and I think Hasbro, but you know, when you said Toy Biz, I knew exactly what you were referring to, and you know, we did collect some of those figures back in the day, and I know you had a lot of them, but they were really, really good. They were, the detail on them was really, really great. The quality of the figures were really strong. Um, One that I'm looking at right now is the Amazing Spider-Man with the multi-jointed action poses,
Yes.
and it has like the bolts in all of his joints and even in his wrist. So it's down to those details where he can move like the way he does in the cartoon or um, in the TV show. So I don't know. I have to just say that. I mean, there's been many series of Lego that have come out from the Marvel universe and the DC universe that came out like around in let's see, like around 2000, between like 2010 and 2012. There were some really really strong Lego versions of Lego sets, Marvel Lego sets.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're just talking about action figures, I gotta say the Toy Biz ones. And one of the claims to fame, this is gonna be my last thought about the Toy Biz set, is that the card, the packaging was strongly based off of that one card that you saw. There's like the blister pack that it comes in, and then you have like the cardboard with all the artwork on it, and it looks exactly like a comic book.
Yeah.
I mean, when you see that in a toy store, and you just see, wall to wall or aisle to aisle action figures inside of a piece of cardboard that's almost the same size as a comic book, you feel like you're getting the comic book and an action figure together. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
So,
man.
hats off to those designers, man. The concept artists, the designers, the people who made the molds, unbelievable.
Yeah, I'm not to look into that. I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm gonna send you the link, Chris. Like, I mean, I'm looking at it right now. There's like, and they go for a lot of money from what I'm seeing here on eBay. Like, I'm looking at a set for $190. It's like, I don't know, it's a whole lot of them. It's all the X-Men ones. It's crazy.
I got my son Stormbreaker. I thought that was so cool. Like he had this mini Stormbreaker axe. I thought that was so cool, and it makes the lightning sound. I was like,
oh really?
Yeah, it's really cool.
I love that. It's like getting him like little Hulk hands.
Yeah.
So if you get him Hulk hands, it's over.
You know what I've seen? Speaking about I don't want to call them toys, but they have these sites where they make the real Iron Man helmet and real Thor hammer.
Yes.
I'm looking into buying one of those. Yo, guys, I gotta go. I'll text me or I'll call you back or whatever. This was good.
Yeah. Did you guys want to plug your social media stuff?
Yeah, my social media is DJ Dreamer 524 on all platforms. DJ Dreamer 524 on all platforms. So just you can find it out. Guys, I gotta cut out. I will talk to you guys later, man.
Peace, man.
All right.
Have a good rest of your night.
Thanks.
And for me, my Instagram is Treatise, Treatise, and my Twitter, sorry, is I am DJ Treats at I am DJ Treats. So yeah, hit me up, follow me. I will sometimes do some posts, some throwback posts on my favorite comic books and toys, and Andre, you and I can talk for days about toys, and I still keep my eyes open something catches my eye. Um, One thing I do have to say is I was going to say the certain. Oh, you know what would be really great is, and I've always had this curiosity about this, are the collectible cards, like the comic book cards.
Yeah.
What is the state of comic book cards anymore? Like, I mean, I know they don't make them anymore, or if they do, they're very low demand. But I still have a very big box of them and a few binders, and I feel like the artwork and the concepts behind a lot of the trading cards, the trading card business was very unique, and I even actually been revisiting the trading cards as a guide to the MCU because some of the characters, especially the cosmic characters,
Mhm.
are so like foreign to me that I've been able to rediscover them by looking at the trading cards.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that too, because I mean, I still have a lot of my cards in the closet from the first four sets, and that's really also what got me more into Marvel or the whole universe was just collecting those, the hologram cards, and that really familiarized myself with every character, every group, famous storylines. And I do miss collecting those, and it's not really a big thing like it was back then. But that's certainly a worthy discussion to do, and we will definitely do a future episode on the Legos too.
Yeah, yeah, have me back for that one. But I think what's great about the trading cards is like really they're small, quick ways to really get like useful information about these characters and these films and these storylines. That you yeah you can Google it and you can whatever, but like I still think that those little trading cards, you can get a lot of information from those trading cards, and it's interactive, not interactive. It's like it's a fun way to engage with that information. You get like power rankings, you
Yeah.
get like uh, first appearance in this comic, you get a little synopsis of a little bio in there. I just really think that it's one of the most concise ways to contextualize a character.
Yeah, most definitely. So yeah, we'll definitely wrap this up. So as always, you can follow us on Facebook on our Silver Screen Action Figure Podcast Facebook page. Follow us on Twitter at Silver Screen AF1. If you have questions, comments, or even suggestions for future episodes, you can contact me directly at silverscreenafpodcast@gmail.com. And this was fun, Rich, and I definitely want to do this again soon. And shout out to Cassius, who is your son, my cousin, and a loyal listener of the show. So, hello, Cassius, and hopefully I have more for you very soon, and especially the Lego and the episode on Pops as well.
Yeah, he's gonna be listening to this, so I'm sure that he's gonna have some ideas. He may even want to be on one of the next episodes. So hey, we'll just make some time for him.
Yeah, let's make it happen. He is more than welcome to be on it. All right,
Yeah, he
guys.
could be the first kid on the show.
Yeah, exactly. He would totally be the totally first kid, and I'd love to get his perspective on the toys that we have today. That are being sold.
Yeah, he's a kid, and he's the target audience. So I think yeah, it makes sense to have him on.
Yeah. All right, guys. So we're signing off, and I'll see you all at the movies.